Well, thank you for joining us on Calming Home TV.
My pleasure. Thanks, Matt.
Well, can you start off by telling us your role in the plenary council leading up to and during?
My role was to assist the drafting committee. So I was invited to this role about 3 months ago, previous to the council, to assist with, well, how to approach the vast volume of feedback that the committee were receiving to develop what was to become the motions for the actual council. So the first round of feedback, we had over 500 contributions, and much closer to the council, we had another round of feedback with over 600 contributions. So obviously there was a bit of data management in there, as well as the actual task of writing. And during the council, we were very busy with drafting, incorporating the edits or the amendments that were travelling through the council, and my particular role was also to assist with putting that up on the screen and helping to keep it as clear as possible to the members as to what they were voting on.
Well, what they were voting on, the importance of these resolutions, are they binding? And if so, how? Is there a mechanism to follow up whatever the binding resolutions are?
Sure. Because we've chosen in Australia to take the path of a plenary council, it's regulated by canon law. So it's very clear what that process is, that the motions that were accepted during the council were signed off by the bishops on the final day. They are then sent to or presented to the bishops' commission in November, when they have their next plenary meeting. So there'll be a 6-month wait. Then the bishops receive these motions and formally then send them to the Vatican to be presented and to receive, I think the word is recognitatio, which is a recognition and an acceptance of these motions, and they become decrees, which are binding church law for the church in Australia. And then there's a 6-month wait for them to come into effect. So the journey, it looks like it'll be at least 12 months. But of course, some of these motions are already things that are taking place or emerging in our church life. So some of them technically might take some time to actually implement, but some are already on the way.
You say the 12 months as if it's a long wait. I think working within the Catholic Church for as long as I have, that sounds lightning speed. That's great that, because there is a lot of progress in the plenary council from what I followed. So if things are starting in that capacity, that's great. But we're going to speak a little bit about some of the issues, some of the problems. One of them being around LGBTQ publication. That was something that, I don't know if redacted is the right word, but there was an issue there. Can you tell us how that was resolved and the issue itself?
Sure. I guess that the challenge is around language, and we in the church are very aware that language is really important. And so there's different views on how to use new language, such as how to speak of groups of people who identify in ways that we've not ever seen in church language before, certainly not in our traditionally not in our official documents. So this was something, it wasn't a small issue. So right from the very beginning, with the listening and dialogue phase and the feedback that the council received, a lot of people spoke of their need to see acknowledgement, at least that sort of language, to be used to be respectful, in a respectful way. So when it came to actually writing motions that are the voice of the plenary council in Australia, we were careful to consider how we use language. And in the end, when we came to the council motions, we gave that choice to the members. So instead of the drafting committee saying, this is your only option, you're either going to use LGBTIQ+ or not, we left that as an amendment open to the members to either remove that language or to take on that language, and it was accepted.
That's a beautiful thing that it was accepted, because that's the right word to use. You spoke about the importance of language. I think the word acceptance there would just feel so wonderful to so many parents and LGBTQ people that have grown up and have suffered hardships or are struggling with some of that stuff right now. So thank you for that. And now, obviously, the question on everyone's mind, the Section 4. How is it blocked in ratification? And can you just speak about that? Were the changes made watering down the role of women? And what was your thoughts there?
Sure. So part 4 was looking at the equal dignity of women and men, and it had a particular purpose to address the issues, again, that we've heard through the many years of feedback to the council. So we'd received feedback as a drafting committee from all sorts of voices with all sorts of perspectives. So we were aware, of course, that this would be a challenging section both to draft, to discuss, simply because people come from such different and diverse thoughts on how they imagine women, whether women are satisfied in the church, whether women are challenged or unhappy, or leaving because of certain issues as well. And we did hear that a really good point was made during the council that women can be all of those things. So we can't write something that as if we put in women in, some women are really happy, some women are unhappy. Well, the reality is that often we find all of those conflicts within our own hearts. So simply in our discussion, there I shouldn't say I'm not a member, but in the discussion that was held, a lot of understanding of the differences in opinion was useful. So the issue during the council was that the part was put up for the vote, and the introductory part, which represented, it was certainly our intention to represent the voices of Catholics who had contributed, wasn't terribly controversial. If you read carefully the actual text, it's not particularly bold. It's trying to acknowledge the situation, and had a single vote to accept that introduction, and that failed. And then each motion failed as well in terms of the deliberative vote. The other members' vote, the consultative vote, had been divided, but it also had approved of the motions. So it was quite a surprise, I think, to everyone, quite a shock that the deliberative vote, which is secret, we don't know who voted what. So each bishop themselves was perhaps unaware that together the result was going to be a fail of each of those motions, and effectively there was no text left that had been approved. So when that was announced, there was a great shock and a call to have a break to allow people to discuss what had happened. The decision was made then not to continue with the agenda, because clearly something of importance had happened. People were waiting to see how this could be not resolved, but moved forward. How are we going to have the plenary council discuss this issue and continue? So it did take a little while. Look, the moment that gave me hope was the next 10 minutes that people were standing waiting, and they were addressed by the Vice President, Bishop Shane McKinlay, who invited people to come back to the tables and to continue their discussions on that topic. Following the lunch break, the decision was made to explore firstly the technical options that were open to the council to review this part, and to explore how to move on with the other parts before we come back to part 4. In the end, it was recognised that within the statutes, there's an allowance to review a vote. And so with the 50% support for that in writing, it was agreed that more work would be put not just into that part, but into bringing the members into engaging with each part as we went along. So there was a lot of careful acknowledgement of issues that people had, and to talk through it, really attending to the text that was in front of them, instead of perhaps in a more disembodied way that perhaps didn't attend to the text. So that was really pleasing to me, that the council took a turn into being a much more mature approach to both the text and to the issues, and discussing them with each other.
So then how did that come to resolution?
So motion 4 took until, I think it was Friday, when the vote was returned back to motion 4, and it was approved very comprehensively by both consultative. I'm looking at the results here. They were very high support in the consultative, and then in the deliberative, it was almost unanimous for all of the parts.
And do you think that the change in language does anything to water down the effectiveness of what was originally written in intent and praxis?
The review of the text itself was to keep with the original text, because the original text does have the voices of the plenary journey. So the second text, the revised text, was carefully attended to perhaps address specific issues, but not take out the meaning of the original motions. So there's some change in it. Some things were moved around. Some references, for example, that were particularly confronting for some people, for the Vatican Commission on the Female Diaconate. That was a reference that was removed, and it was replaced with talking about canon law. Should the universal law of the Church be modified to authorise the diaconate, the Plenary Council recommends that the bishops examine how to implement that in the context of the Church in Australia. Effectively, the end result is the same, that there will be some examination of what that would look like if it was permitted in universal law. So I'm satisfied that part 4 still holds its same meaning, and most likely the same consequence. But the consequence now is that there's been a great deal of attention drawn to this issue, that perhaps the bishops have been confronted very, very visually and emotionally with the consequences of their decisions.
Globally too. I think that has global ramifications. This is something that Australia is being looked at by the Catholic world, and those that are Westerners that are left. As we see, like, there is youth in some churches and some parishes. We have a great one in Holy Eucharist in St. Albans that the Redemptorists have, but there's also a church that's growing older, and those that are still willing to be in these conversations even are looking to this for hope, and to find senses of dignity, and to find senses of positive change. I think we see that in some of the synodality. But I have a question that might be a bit confronting that I'm going to ask everybody that I interview, because I've asked Catholics, non-Catholics alike, describing what this equal dignity meant. So, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the equal dignity part of the section 4 holds that if the Catholic Church in canon law from Rome allows to further explore female diaconate, the Church in Australia will make itself available to use it to implement these changes, correct? Equal dignity is a bit of a stretch language-wise, because we're not saying that they can be priests, we're not saying that they can be bishops, we're not saying that they can be cardinals, we're not saying that they can be pope. So is that the right, it's a great step in the right direction. I think it holds a mansion with many rooms together, and I get all of that, but do you see this as an equal, as female equality within the church, or do you see this as a step in the right direction?
Great. I think firstly, we have to be aware that the plenary council has a specific purpose, a specific context, and its motions have, they're quite restricted. They have to be concrete, they have to fit within canon law and so on. So there's all of that. So that we're never going to see the word ordination or something that jumps right outside that context. Now, in terms of equal dignity, we've got 2,000 years of history in the Catholic Church that has not, we're only recently coming to the point where we're really examining what that means. And within a wider culture that also is examining what that means. So for me, equal dignity in the church would be our ability to recognise that women and men need to be supported and nourished in their own response to God's invitation to vocation. And that our own human restrictions on vocation, our own human restrictions on what we think that person or that type of person or that gender, we're actually restricting God's call. So for me, that's the conversation we should be having. We're still a bit stuck in the whole power
dynamic
discussion.
Yeah. Yep.
What's allowed, what's not allowed, and being unable to break out of that. The people who don't have power don't have a voice that's respected or even acknowledged to be that their own voice is responding to what they've discerned as God's call. And I actually think that's really insensitive and very undisciple-like to actually be doing that to each other.
Sure, and I think that we're there's like this, it's ramming up against a secular culture where those things don't really exist anymore. People can't tell you who you ought to be in the same way as in the past. We talk about 2,000 years of past. We talk about different cultures, but specifically to ours, there's not many roadblocks, right? There's not many. The barriers have been changed so much that there's, that a female prime minister wouldn't shock anybody. A female this, a gay, bisexual wouldn't. It's not. It's people are allowed to be who they are. Therefore, in response to being within a church, to move to that understanding of where we're situated culturally, it's very complex, and I think that dealing with it the way you did in the synodal process, I think it was just amazing that you were able to keep it all together with so many varying opinions.
And that's what gives me hope, Matt, because I think we also need to be aware of the wider perspective, which is we are a universal, a global church, and that not all nations have a culture like ours that's that's challenging patriarchy.
Yep.
And so that gave me hope that the tables that the members were sitting at were deliberately quite mixed. Okay, the women were dispersed, the Eastern people were dispersed, the bishops were dispersed, and they found themselves, and not just in this week, but leading up to the council, they had been immersed in this process of what they call spiritual conversation, where people are encouraged to begin with scripture, to begin with respect and listening, and to really listen to each other, and then to have their own opportunity to speak. And I think that practice, that training actually helped them when they needed it most during the plenary council assembly too. Yeah, excellent. And you could really see from afar the synodality at work. I think just even not being in the building, arm's length, when that section 4 happened and I was speaking to people sort of on the ground here and there, like kind of shocked. And it's also, I think, appropriate to mention that it had to have a 2/3 majority. It was majority passed by the bishops, right? It wasn't that there was a majority of 50+1 that had agreed with the first drafting, right? That's what John Warhurst had told me. So that gives me a lot of hope as well. But the fact that we don't know what bishops voted yes, voted no, speaks to a clericalism which still is in the church,
different, not just different rules, but we don't sort of have to answer to you in a sort of accountability. Was clericalism discussed at all in any meaningful way? Did you feel a shift in any way, or is that a bridge too far at this moment?
Well, you'll see from the text itself, it's mentioned in, I think, in the part 5 on the sacramental life of the church, and it quotes Pope Francis talking about clericalism and the abuse of sacramental power. It wasn't discussed as such, but I think, if we talk about communicating synodality, it's often more, if we're not using words, we're using our actions. And the way that, as I was just saying, with the way that people were seated together, that conversation was held, and to some extent that the way that the decisions were made. Remembering, of course, that the previous plenary council didn't have any lay people involved at all. 80 something years ago. So we are pushing boundaries. It may not look like it to us who are used to the rest of society and other workplaces, but this is stretching the church. It's provoking all sorts of conversations, whether they're overt or just bubbling along, as I suspect clericalism is. And I think it's actually, what it's provoking is the work of the Spirit to bring about conversion.
Yep.
So the hope is, if you draw a circle around the members, we want all the members to be moving together, rather than just bits flying off here and there.
But I think we do ourselves a disservice by not having the courage to ask some of the questions. And I hear what you say. Exactly. 2 excellent points that you made were, this is going to have ramifications for the rest of the world, and there's a little bit of cultural superiority to say, oh, we're right, but there's other cultures that are not in the same place as us. So it's interesting what you said, that, and about the stretch, because you want it to stretch and you want to be pushing for accountability, but you're not out here to snap. And I think that the plenary council showed a way forward with synodality that was quite miraculous. When I saw the people standing out, I thought this could go. There could have been, it could have went another way, I believe. And I think that you guys, everybody involved, guys and men and women involved, did an excellent job in that.
Well, on that note, Matt, I guess I'd ask you to imagine what would it look like at that point. We use words like pivot point, or that point where it could have gone somewhere else. If the response had been one coming out of clericalism, what would have happened to the plenary council? If there was some sort of, right, this is the decision, the bishops have spoken, we're going to move on. That we might describe that as a clerical response. No, but what came out, and what, as I said, what gives me hope is that it was a synodal response. It was respectful. It listened and saw the potential of people to work together and come to a resolution of themselves, that they then took up ownership of part 4 and every other part that followed. And that I can say that because of the evidence in the voting. Yeah. The bishops and the consultative votes approved almost everything that followed from there. So I think that's evidence that people took up ownership and owned the motions and the document.
Well, you might not believe this, but people reacted hysterically and mean online. I know that's unlike Twitter usually, but I hope this clarifies. I hope if people take the time to listen to this, it clarifies some of exactly what happened and speaks to the outcome. You spoke a bit about the different facets of being a woman and different facets of womanhood, and the mother language is the next thing I want to speak to you about, because I think that that's something to address now. 2,000 years ago, pre so much that has happened, it's a different form of what was expected to be a woman. Now, to live a single life, to live a married life, to live a mother's life, to live a doctor's life, to live outside of the church, which is what everybody is, looks very different. So what was the conversation around the motherhood language being used in the council?
I guess that the the interventions and the requests that were being made that that motherhood would be respected, that perhaps there wasn't enough evidence of the use of that word or the use of the word of families and so on. Again, was a specific context for each part within a plenary council as being, motions that needed to be concrete and so on. So I think it's a challenging area because it's such an emotional area where people want to see they want to see themselves reflected. When we make a statement, we want to see respect for different groups in the church, and of course motherhood, but also, as you say, what about single people, what about young people, and so on. So again, I'll come back to, I think the best outcome is that we respect people where they are in their own response to God's call within their own vocation. So, I mean, myself, I'm a mother and I take that extremely seriously, and I've sacrificed a great deal to be a mother, but I actually feel my vocation as a theologian is my response to God's call, for something that consumes my whole life. So we've got to be careful with our language. We don't want to exclude people. We want them to feel like they belong, and that they're contributing, and again, that everybody has that equal dignity in their different roles, their different vocations. And when we uphold our own, that we're not pushing down another person's.
It's almost like, if I'm trying to surmise what you're saying, it's almost as if the Catholic Church should be some sort of universal church. That's pretty much an excellent way to end this. I have one last question. What's next? What are the steps we can do? How do we follow along? How do we keep the steps going in the right direction?
Well, I guess, I mean, that's a great question. I think, firstly, if people are interested in the plenary council and what it had to say, attending to the words of each motion. Each motion's only fairly small. What did the council actually say about LGBTIQ people, for example? What did it actually say about motherhood? So instead of listening to some of those really frantic voices on the internet,
Catholic Twitter,
just spend a little bit of quiet time. The Plenary Council website itself has got some beautiful resources, including the videos and the prayers of the actual councils, which might help people to engage in a slightly different way. But look, obviously we'll come up to the implementation phase, and whether you want to wait 12 months or not, take up one of these motions, really sit with it and think, what would that look like in my parish? What would that look like in my family if we take this particular motion seriously? So, for example, motion 5.3, permit lay people to participate in a formal ministry of preaching. Now, preaching is permitted for lay people in canon law, but to call it a formal ministry, such as we do for catechists, lectors, acolytes, this is actually now an opportunity for those people who are called to preach, whether you're male or female, who have those gifts, maybe a vast array of experience, and have never been formally appreciated or given opportunities. So you might find yourself in that group, or you might find yourself being able to invite those people to come to your parish to give you an example of their preaching. I see that as one thing that has such great potential. So please sit with some motions, see what really grasps you and what that would look like in your context, and bring it about.
On behalf of everyone at Common Home TV, we really appreciate your time. We hope this isn't the last time we get to check in with you.
Great. Good on you. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks. Cheers.